Have you ever felt like you missed out on a franchise, or at least wished you played a certain video game series at an earlier age? I think the company behind it, Nintendo, barely marketed one particular series and therefore received very little notice from most people growing up in the 90s, like myself. In retrospect, I feel I got Nintendo from Nintendo. Get it?
Boo! You suck!
I owned every Nintendo console. Well, almost. I received most new games mainly as Christmas presents, or sometimes birthday presents if my folks could afford it. They were mostly every major Mario and Zelda entry as they came out, and I used to rent many games from the video store. There was one series that I was aware of that I could not make heads or tails on. I remember seeing a commercial for a strange Game Boy game of a character in a spacesuit fighting a monster trying to bash him with its head. This is where I first encountered the Metroid series. I also remember a box in my video store of a game that was never in or available, assuming the person who rented it just kept it, of a red pterodactyl getting shot by an equivalent person in a spacesuit, but this time with an arm cannon. I honestly thought at first that the pterodactyl was the main character from first glance because of how it sticks out compared to the person in the spacesuit. Years go by, 5th generation era has passed, I am now a senior in high school, and I noticed that retail stores and my friend Steven had a GameCube game called Metroid Prime. I recalled that name all those years ago and ended up borrowing the game and playing it. I ended up enjoying it quite a bit and played the sequels until the final sequel came out years later in 2007 on the 7th generation system, the Nintendo Wii. Shortly before that final Prime game came out, the Wii had a virtual console, allowing a person like me, who missed out on playing the earlier 2D Metroid titles, to make things right. The Virtual Console released the original NES Metroid 2 weeks before Prime 3 came out in August of 2007, and that was how I first played this title. It was brutal, like games of that classic 8-bit era were. I, however, still became a fan of the series after that, and went on to play some real bangers of Metroid titles that may be up there with the greatest games of all time. Before I go into the game itself, I want to touch upon how the concept for Metroid and the genre it defined morphed into being.
銀河連邦司令メトロイドを破壊せよ。
地底深く広がる迷路要塞に宇宙征服の野望が渦巻く。
行け宇宙戦士サムス。
ファミリーコンピュータディスクカードにアクション&迷路ゲームメトロイド。やればやるほどディスクシステム。
Metroid was developed by Nintendo's Research and Development Team 1 and Intelligent Systems under the original title Space Hunter. After the success of many platformer games under the Nintendo umbrella, the team wanted to make a shooter game that combined the action platforming aspect of Super Mario Bros. And the adventure exploration aspect of The Legend of Zelda, after the release of the little-known and probably not so successful Brain Breaker, released for the Sharp X1 by Enix. Gunpei Yokoi, one of the pioneers of Nintendo's reinvention from card company to electronics company, was producer of this game, who would later create the Game Boy, along with directors Satoru Okada and Masao Yamamoto, set forth to create a non-linear style game that required the player to venture into a maze-like setting where exploration and finding upgrades and new abilities was the primary means to progress. This required learning how to backtrack and remember places the player may have passed by but couldn't access, like for instance a different colored door or a platform that was too high to reach. The further the player progresses into this massive maze, the more difficult the enemies become, requiring the player to learn how to avoid or to dispatch them while taking minimal damage. A lot of inspiration came from westerns in general that depicted the bounty hunter, which is what our protagonist is in this universe, and one particular science fiction movie that provided a darker and ambient tone as compared to the bright and epic tone of films like Star Wars and Star Trek the Motion Picture. Hirokazu Tanaka, a musician with a background in classical piano, reggae, and forming Beatles and Elton John cover bands, with a degree in electronic engineering, composed the music for this game, giving the game a unique sense of atmosphere, setting it apart from previous games he worked on, including Balloon Fight, Duck Hunt, Urban Champion, and many others. Makoto Kano, lead designer of the Game & Watch series and the Nintendo Beam Gun, put together the initial concepts and the scenario for this new game, while character designs were done by Hiroji Kiyotane, who designed the title character, Samus Aran, Hirofuma and Yoshio Sakamoto. The project's name was decided and was a combination of the words Metro and Android, therefore the game Metroid was released in Japan in August of 1986 and the US in August of 1987. Next up, I will be talking about the story and the gameplay, so if you have not played the original Metroid and don't want to be spoiled, I'd tune out now and play the game. It's still the toughest game in the series, but the payoff is more than worth it. Let's turn on the NES and enter the dark, brooding world of Metroid.
Challenge is Metroid. The power is Nintendo. Defend the planet Zebus against the evil Mother Brain. It's survival or destruction. Do battle or die. Metroid only from Nintendo.
The first thing we hear is a moody opening and the title screen with blue letters flashing out the title, Metroid. The title theme here starts with a sense of menace and a dark tone that will set it apart from other Nintendo games of that time, including the upbeat and challenging Mario themes. With the epic and adventurous Zelda motifs. It starts off with an ambient menace, but then transitions into something that will encourage the player to play, and that they can be triumphant in the end. Just this theme alone makes me want to play this game even more now, so let's see what is going on in this particular sci-fi world. Metroid truly begins in the year 2000 of the cosmic calendar, where the dominant political entity in the galaxy is the Galactic Federation, an intergalactic congress made up of representatives and delegates from many civilized worlds to provide a fair and structured universe that would promote peace, prosperity, and trade between the planets. Unfortunately, like all governments and establishments, a threat materialized in the form of space pirates that started raids on many Federation ships, looting resources and striking fear into the hearts of the Federation citizens. A combat force known as the Federal Police was formed to counter the space pirates, but the vastness of space proved too difficult for the Federation to combat the pirates, even with their advanced technology. The Galactic Federation government searched high and low to recruit bounty hunters with the best resources, weapons, and skills to venture into space to combat the pirates. They were known as space hunters and were provided with insane bonuses to hunt down and destroy the pirates, who by the year 20X5 continued to raid and pillage until one particular ship was seized, carrying an unknown organism from planet SR-388. The organism that scientists deemed Metroid believed this predatory creature was responsible for the destruction of life on SR-388, and the thought of it in space pirates' hands was utterly disturbing, providing an existential threat to the Galactic Federation. The pirates also learned that using beta rays for 24 hours will allow the Metroid to asexually reproduce, pushing the Federation to take immediate action and discover that the Metroids are actually being harvested deep in their base on the planet Zebus. Zebus, however, is a natural fortress and impossible to assault directly, let alone navigate, since the interior of the planet is one large maze. Space Hunter Samus Aran, in his large cybernetic suit, is selected to infiltrate the space pirate fortress, and the emergency order is given. Defeat the Metroid on planet Zebus and destroy the mechanical life vein of the pirates, Mother Brain. Samus sets forth on his very first mission as a space hunter. Now on Zebes, Samus emerges to an epic fanfare telling of the character's importance not only to this game, but obviously to the fate of the galaxy. The player controls Samus in this initial area of Brinstar to a very upbeat theme, trying to encourage the player to explore and continue playing, and that the enemies are not too bad in this area. As Samus, like in other games like Adventure of Link, I'd say it's safe to say when making a choice of going right or left, going left will harbor an item or a secret, whereas right takes you further into the game. Well, in this case, going left will get you to the very first upgrade with another memorable jingle. Yup, the morph ball that allows Samus to turn into a rolling ball and access smaller paths that they wouldn't fit into otherwise is here. Now we can take Samus right and explore this first part of the base. There are several large vertical rooms with platforms that take Samus to different doors that will branch to different paths, allowing you to find more and more upgrades. Unlike Super Mario Bros., where upgrades like the Power Star were temporary, in Metroid, when you find a particular upgrade for Samus, the change is permanent. What kind of upgrades exist in this game? Well, like in The Legend of Zelda, games with the heart container, Samus goes around looking for different energy tank upgrades that add to the player's health. A trope I think should never get old. That is one of the few elements of Breath of the Wild I actually approve of, that I feel is the only thing that truly gives it a sense of progression and the only incentive to explore and complete the shrines, but that's a story for another video. Throughout the game, Samus acquires many different upgrades, including missile expansions, increasing the ammo of her missile launcher, to help take out harder enemies, and to open red doors with 5 of them. Other power-ups were found in rooms usually found in a ball being held by a Chozo statue that have a weird, mysterious single-tone theme that makes me curious what is being kept here. What is a Chozo, you ask? Chozo are an ancient avian or bird-like humanoid race that all but disappeared from the galaxy recently, that have ruins on almost all the major planets, including Zebes, that Samus travels to in her business. The power suit that Samus uses is Chozo technology, and has been impossible for both the Federation and the pirates to properly replicate. Chozo upgrades in this first Metroid include the Long Beam that doesn't dissipate after a few yards, the Ice Beam to freeze enemies and use them as platforms, the Morph Bomb to find hidden passages in the Morph Ball mode, and find either upgrades or new areas to explore. The Varia suit that lessens enemy damage by 50%. The High Jump boots to cause Samus to jump reaching higher areas than before. The Wave Beam is another weapon upgrade Samus can get, but it will supersede the Ice Beam and vice versa. So it's up to the player what direction they want to take on how to play. The Wave will deal more damage, but the Ice Beam is way more useful in exploration and completing the game 100%. The final upgrade to get is the famous Screw Attack, which allows Samus to somersault and destroy enemies at the same time, making traversing the dungeon less difficult. Oh yeah, let's talk about the difficulty. Metroid is an extremely difficult but reasonably fair game compared to other NES games of that era that I may or may not have raged over at one point or another. You start with Samus at only 30 health out of 100, and even with collecting energy tank upgrades, you still start with that very same amount, which in my opinion is an insane one, but hey, it makes completing the game all the more rewarding, so I am fine with it. As Samus, you explore the 5 different areas, starting with Brinstar, and come to learn that in order to access the Metroid Lab and confront the Mother Brain in the final area of Turian, you will need to seek out the pirate leaders Kraid and Ridley somewhere in this gigantic maze. In order to encounter Kraid, a fat, upright reptile who somehow resembles another Mario character, you will need to find his lair, which is located in the deeper, darker depths of Brinstar, accessed by bombing the second room to be in a room with a menacing statue and an elevator that leads down. This new area has pools of acid and a very green metallic look that only gets more sinister as you progress in the area, adding red eyes and fangs to the mix. A fake Kraid is encountered if you explore deeply enough that has a brownish color. Fake blocks are present in an extensive vertical room that requires precise aiming and quick movements before the blocks reform, knocking you off. You go and encounter Kraid, instigating a boss battle with a theme that may or may not resemble another classic Nintendo game. Kraid is actually pretty tough, throwing a bunch of shit either perfectly horizontal or above you, making it next to impossible to not get hit. And I remember dying a few times before I finally beat him. And take a note of how Kraid is a normal size in this original game, which may or may not be the case in future games. If you shoot a certain part of this room's grid, you may find a hidden upgrade now, so the player should not be afraid to just shoot everything, everywhere, anytime, to find hidden upgrades that may just turn out in the most unexpected places. The other leader, Ridley, a pterodactyl dragon pirate, is encountered in the deepest depths of Zebes itself. In order to find and defeat Ridley, Samus will need to further explore Brinstar and get to the bottom of the second vertical shaft in order to find a room with an elevator that leads further down to the area of Norfair. The theme for this area tells me as a player, so you think you got this game? Well, my friend, prepare to get lost and experience an even greater danger here. To counter this, exploration once again is a must, and besides the usual missile expansions and energy tanks, the space jump and the screw attack upgrades can be found here if you look hard enough, and those will make a world of difference traversing this area with more ease and comfort. When Samus gets to the very bottom of Norfair, an elevator with another menacing guardian statue next to it will take you to the deepest levels of Zebes, where Ridley himself awaits. Ridley's lair is deep underneath the surface of Zebes, and deep is an understatement. This area looks to be a combination of a purple Giger-esque room, you know, Ichar Giger, the original designer of the Alien in the Alien franchise. More on that later. Also to note is the music for this area simply conveys confusion and menace with many unexpected dangers, even with Samus's likely equipment. The beauty of this game is that you could get to Ridley's lair with most upgrades or minimal upgrades, but even with the max upgrades, this area is still tough. There are some places that are really tight with enemies trying to hit you, and even with the screw attack, you will get hit, so I generally still need to be real careful here, or I could die just as easily as the beginning of this game. Lots of lava here, just like in Norfair, and hidden secrets in the floors to make the player use their learned abilities throughout the game, while also avoiding potential traps like the energy tank in the corridor, guarded by a hidden hole in the floor, leading to the lower levels, so be wary. One missile tank I've never achieved is right here in this area, where you need to accurately time and space your jump to reach the platform, or else you will fall and you'll have to backtrack around the entire Ridley's lair to try it again. Didn't I say this is still not easy, even with max equipment? Well, after some additional and challenging traversing, we finally come across Ridley in his chamber, and this is not the Ridley we all know today. The Ridley design we've come to take for granted actually got his start in a later game, a third Metroid game. A story for another retrospective. Ridley will leap up and down and shoot fireballs, and seeing this reminded me of another boss from another game that pretty much did the exact same thing. There are many ways to beat Ridley, but once you do, you will have unlocked the final area, Turian, where the Mother Brain and the Metroids are located. You gotta navigate Samus out of the lair, out of Norfair, return to Brinstar, and reach the room with the two boss statues. Shooting the two boss statues will open a bridge that takes us to an elevator, to the conclusion of this mission. Turian is a pretty straightforward area, with a single path and music that is telling us to expect nothing but straightforward danger up ahead. Every room will have a Metroid swoop down on you and attack you. I am usually prepared to counter with morph bombs and to have the ice beam on hand because that is their only weakness. Ice them and then blast them with 5 missiles. With stronger orange doors that require 10 missiles, it makes me wonder now if these doors have Metroid DNA incorporated into it, creating an effective biotechnical obstruction, or is it just a coincidence? Food for thought. We also get the classic energy rings aimed at Samus here too. After dodging rings and dispatching all the Metroids, we finally arrive at the chamber of the Mother Brain. She is protected by 2 barriers requiring missiles to weaken until destroyed, so it is tricky to be on the platform shooting the barriers while the energy rings are aimed at you with lava underneath. Well, finally we are here at the Mother Brain, and just like the barriers, this is even more tricky to do simply unloading missiles at Mother Brain until she is ultimately destroyed, which took me several tries and hours of frustration. Her destruction is not the end though. and we get a self-destruct countdown indicating the destruction of the lab, so Samus only has a minute to get the hell out and jump up onto the smallest of platforms back to the surface before the installation blows. Samus emerges victorious, and we learn that Samus is, in fact, a woman. Oh my god! Yup, a strong female character and still my favorite in gaming. The first mission is a success, and now we must await the next one. Finishing this game was such an insane payoff for me, especially after tackling the insane difficulty while getting used to playing it on my Wii Classic controller. This game was the first one to use a password system because it didn't have the component to save like The Legend of Zelda did. To this day, can any of you believe that Super Mario 3 on the original NES had no means to save the game? I used to secretly, without telling my parents, without them knowing, I would leave the game on so I could beat it later on, which I was not always successful and always had to erase my progress. Some notable passwords for Metroid include Justin Bailey, where you play as Samus in a pink leotard with most upgrades. There's also Narpa's Sword, is one where you get infinite health and missiles, and a funny one called Engage Ridley Motherfucker, which literally fucks with the game, making it think you've been playing it for 314 years. I'm sure every fan knows this, but I will reiterate here that Metroid took loads of inspiration from the first Alien movie. Especially when you see the air duct scene in the film, sealing the junctions had a shape that made me think of Samus's morph ball, or the paths that Samus would morph into. Producer Yoshio Sakamoto has said this about Alien. I think the film Alien had a huge influence on the production of the first Metroid game. All the team members were affected by H.R. Giger's design work, and I think they were aware that such designs would be a good match for the Metroid world we had already put in place. Composer Hirokazu Tanaka had this to add about the influence of Alien. I was inspired by the first spaceships drifting in the darkness of space. I wasn't inspired by Alien's music, but I was fascinated by the senses of urgency, tension, and uneasiness that dominated the whole movie. I was affected by that mood of not knowing when something would happen. Other tributes to Alien included the space pirate guardian Ridley, named after Ridley Scott. Mother Brain Computer was named after the Nostromo's AI, Mother. Metroids will latch onto your head like the facehuggers, and Samus Aran was based on Ellen Ripley in her spacesuit. Perhaps Parker's suggestion of freezing Kane with the facehugger on him might have inspired the Ice Beam as a weakness for the Metroids. Who knows?
How come you guys don't freeze him?
It's cool to know that the creators of this game admitted that they owe a lot to Alien. I may or may not have done a retrospective on the first Alien a while back with an awesomely terrifying opening montage inspired by the original trailer. A link to that retrospective is in the description. Metroid has garnered critical acclaim and praise for its unique style of gameplay and has pretty much created its own genre in video gaming. 2D platformer in an interconnected world designed like a maze, which encourages exploration and backtracking while finding permanent upgrades to help solve puzzles and figure out how to progress further in the game. The original game is one of 3 that have sold over 2 million units and has been consistently re-released on multiple platforms in the years following, including the Wii, the Wii U, the Switch, and heck, even the GameCube. The game inspired many games thereafter, including Zelda 2, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, and the latter series helped coin the term Metroidvania. So now you got some really great games still being made to this day that adopt the same gameplay style with unique art and endless sea of new creative takes on the genre. Keep those games coming. Metroid also started a franchise for Nintendo and has, in my opinion, some of the most passionate and loyal, and of course the most niche compared to Nintendo staples Mario and Zelda. We got several games furthering the 2D series. We also have a reinvention of Metroid in first-person 3D, creating the new game genre, first-person adventure, as opposed to first-person shooter. One day, many years later, a member of the staff wanted to port a game quite possibly my favorite on the Super Nintendo. But Mr. Sakamoto, now a major producer at Nintendo, decided to port the original Metroid instead. With many games in the Metroid series at this point, Samus's first mission got updated for a modern audience, when such a thing was viewed in a positive light. Henceforth, development for Metroid Zero Mission began, and a game I didn't even know existed for several years because I was not much of a handheld gamer. Forgive me. The original Metroid would be definitively redefined with much needed elements that make it the definitive version of the first game in my opinion.
彼女に襲いかかる最悪のシナリオ、破壊と脱出、2つの試練、ゲームボーイアドバンス、メトロイドゼロミッション。
In a blur of raw talent and courage, a life's mission begins. You can experience it as Samus in Metroid Zero Mission, her first adventure as an intergalactic bounty hunter, rated E for everyone.
Zero Mission, like I said, redefined Samus's first mission to Zebes. In this particular case, it was for the better. The main plot is pretty much the same, but there's more story that was included, including an opening cutscene, and they also added extra lore and backstory to the events of the game while retaining some of the mystery going forward, because the charm of Samus and the Metroid series is the mysterious nature of the galaxy's greatest bounty hunter. Cutscenes have also been added to other impactful moments in the game, including entering new areas, encountering bosses like Kraid and Ridley, and others. The music here is remixed, and the sound of it feels very faithful to the original, with other tunes added from later games, which I won't get into here. Zero Mission includes features established by earlier games, including Samus's power-ups have increased. Her aim was also updated too. In the original game, she could only aim horizontally and upwards. This game, she can also aim downwards and diagonally. Also, unlike the original, this game is more accessible to a normie player in terms of the overall difficulty, which now there is a normal and a hard mode. Like the later games, a map was included to help the player keep track of where Samus was going, but also adds a feature that tells the player where to go in case you get lost, which I think detracts from the Metroid experience because these games are exploratory in nature and meant for the player to discover things on their own, as opposed to the game telling you where to go. The general layout is similar, but different enough for this game to feel like a fresh experience, with new upgrades that weren't in the original, but were in the later games. For instance, like, the power bombs, the space booster, amongst many others were added. Beam weapons can stack in this game this time, and traps have been placed throughout this reimagining of the planned Zebes. It's ambushed by several entirely new mini-bosses that block your way, including the Charge Beam Beasts, Dioramu, the giant one-eyed centipede in Brinstar, the acid worm as Kraid's henchman in his lair, a giant larvae known as Kirugiru in Norfair, and Imago, a fly-like creature and a henchman to Ridley himself. Of course, Kraid and Ridley are both back and look very different from their original incarnations. Let's just say they were updated to look a certain way from a certain game that hasn't yet happened in this timeline. Like the original game, once you defeat Kraid and Ridley in their lairs respectively, the path to Turian and Mother Brain is opened. Turian is pretty much the same straightforward area as the original game, but this time the Metroids will appear from the background to attack you, but this time they are larger and way more terrifying to behold. At least they were for me, especially when we see a corpse of a space pirate or two laying there motionless. The rooms are also more defined than before in the usual Zero Mission style, here with more gun turrets shooting those classic orange rings at Samus. The Mother Brain chamber is pretty much the same here too, with the turrets continuing to fire at you repeatedly as you hammer your missiles at the shields until you are finally in the inner chamber with Mother Brain. She is different here. Now she has a noticeable single eye you need to hit in order to damage her. When her eye closes, she starts to glow a rainbow light and counterattacks with a rainbow beam. I'm sure we haven't seen this before. She gets defeated, and the self-destruct countdown is activated par for the course. However, it is trickier to escape now that the platforms will now become pit blocks and will now collapse under Samus if you're not quick on your feet. There are also other factors trying to hinder your progress, but hey, we made it to the elevator. Oh shit, it's not over. Samus is now in Crateria, in what looks like another familiar area and a scenario that somehow she foresees herself doing again in the future. She escapes in her ship, leaving behind a massive explosion that makes me think of a certain scene from a certain movie. We see her take off her suit on her ship. What? It happened in Alien with Ripley, so why not here too? We see Zero Suit Samus, but hey, she's not out of the woods yet. She finds herself surrounded in orbit and then forced to flee space pirate ships taking heavy fire and ends up falling through the atmosphere, crashing back on Zebes. She survives, but she is now defenseless in her Zero Suit attire, armed only with a weak emergency pistol. Her only course of action now is to infiltrate the space pirate mothership nearby if she ever hopes to escape this dangerous place. Can she survive long enough to achieve this? I do have to say before it's too late that some of the added music in this game, especially dealing with the legend of the Chozo, reminds me of a future first-person adventure. Or past, depending on the context. The gameplay drastically changes here. It still retains its platforming elements, but with Samus now depowered, she's going to have to emulate Solid Snake and use stealth to accomplish her mission, evading space pirates who will kill her in a heartbeat if they see her. I guess the reason we didn't see any space pirates in the original game was because they were all off-world, as we learn in this game. You know, I really like that when creators take the time to try to explain inconsistencies due to creative changes over the years, because nerds like me love it when things are made consistent. If the space pirate spots you, the ship will go to alert and lockdowns will commence, so she will need to spot vents to crawl through to progress and escape her pursuers. When she successfully evades them, the ship will go back to normal operations and the lockdown will end, opening the doors. I gotta say, this additional section completely took me by surprise. I had no idea they'd turn it into a Metal Gear style game, and it killed me on the first several tries until I got used to the new style of play, which kept me on my toes probably the entire time. After a series of platforming and evading in the neighboring Chozo temple, she comes across another boss, the Ruins Test. Apparently, according to lore, Samus was here as a child, hence the familiarity, but now she must fight this test in the form of a Chozo wearing some variation of the power suit. Samus has to shoot the orb featuring the symbol 4 times in order to pass the test, while evading lightning attacks. Shooting the orb with Samus, though, will harm her, so the attack opportunity window is relatively small. Samus passes the test and regains her power suit with all her abilities. But now, those 3 unknown items that were likely collected earlier are now unlocked. Gravity Suit, to move freely underwater. Space Jump, to continually somersault midair. And the Plasma Beam, to incinerate and melt shit. With Samus having every ability, now's the time to explore the rest of the game and try to get 100%. all the missile, power bomb, and energy tank expansions with some neat puzzles to collect them all. Honestly, the trickiest ones to get are the ones that require the creative use of the speed booster. The beauty of these games is that you don't need to collect everything to finish the game, but the incentive in this game to collect everything is so freaking high. Like, exploration is heavily rewarded if you search every nook and cranny of the game. The upgrades are permanent, making it all the more rewarding to unlock, unlike a recent game. To finish this game, the player goes back to the mothership fighting through legions of space pirates to reach the room featuring Mecha Ridley, a robot designed to emulate his namesake, the final boss of Zero Mission. This boss has many attacks, including homing missiles, avoiding homing missiles that reminds me of a certain epic final Sonic boss. His usual fireballs, claw swipes, and laser beams. Samus needs to hit Mecha Ridley in its heart or something like that in its chest with concussive missiles. If you're at 100% item completion, the battle will be 3 times more difficult and 3 times more rewarding to beat. He goes down, and oh shit, you know you're at the end of the game when you have another self-destruct countdown initiate, telling the player to get Samus the hell out of there. Oh shit, Samus' ship is destroyed, so how is she going to escape this time? Well, first things first, run like hell out of there. She recalls the escape bay and makes her way to it, but is attacked by 2 gray space pirates. After she defeats them, she goes in and steals a pirate escape ship that for some reason was designed to resemble a male gamete, or a sex cell. Maybe those space pirates were not only the bad guys in this universe, but worse, they were also toxic to the fairer sex.
Boo, you suck!
Or maybe it's just supposed to be a tadpole. All jokes aside, the mothership is destroyed and Samus gets off the planet alive and already ready for the next mission. Did you get 100%, or did you just want to do enough to beat this game? For me, the incentive to complete it at 100% and that sense of progression and permanent upgrades makes this Metroid series, and especially this first mission, both the original game and Zero Mission, as must-plays. Zero Mission went on to earn a critical acclaim from video game journalists and magazines during a time when I still trusted said outlets, but even to this day, I still agree on this sentiment. Zero Mission is, in my opinion, the better game. More refined, more content, more bosses, expanded and improved upon in every way, while maintaining consistency with the rest of the series that started with a particular third Metroid game I may or not be real fond of. Over the course of close to 4 decades now, the Metroid series has had its ebbs and flows, its ups and downs in terms of getting new entries into the series. The first 3 games came out roughly 4 years apart, and then there was an 8-year gap between a beloved third Metroid game and the next installment's Metroid 4, or Fusion for the layman, and Prime, the first in a new genre of Metroid games detailing the first-person adventure, but still with the heart and core of the 2D games and what makes them tick in the first place. We got some more games every 3 years in the 2000s, and then nothing after Metroid Other M for 5 years until we get an announcement of some spin-off Federation Force game that pissed myself and other Metroid fans off to no degree. However, 2 years later in 2017, we got not 1 but 2 Metroid announcements, and we got an additional one a few years ago as a result. There are still some announcements that I'm itching to hear about, and I'm curious where the series will go from here. The only issue is the series never sold as well as Mario and Zelda. That's why the series doesn't get nearly as much, content. But with recent sales, especially with the most recent Metroid game, sales are going up for Metroid. The fan base is growing, and I'm happy to see where this goes from here. The Mario and Zelda series are loose with their continuities. Well, Mario probably doesn't even have a continuity, though fans have attempted to make a timeline. But I did discuss the Zelda one in my Ocarina of Time retrospective, link is in the description. The Zelda timeline separates each game by various areas in the history of Hyrule, so the hero in each game is a different person. But the Metroid timeline is a pretty solid one. All games feature the very same Samus Aran as she goes from one spacefaring mission to the next. This retrospective covers her very first mission as a bounty hunter, and then chronologically the first 3 Prime games, and maybe a future installment if it ever gets released, are next, followed by Metroids 2, 3, Other M, 4, and 5. Very easy to understand and even easier to get behind and get invested in our heroine as she continues to kick ass, unlock the mysteries of the planets she's investigating, and bettering herself with the permanent upgrades that allows even more chances to kick some space pirate ass. If you are new to the series, I'd recommend playing Zero Mission due to the ease of controls and difficulty, and the consistency with the rest of the series. If, however, you are a retro guy or gal and want to play a classic 8-bit adventure that is really tough to navigate and beat, then I'd recommend that original NES game. Metroid and Metroid Zero Mission are 2 games that have redefined the adventure genre of video games. The original being a hallmark for introducing interconnected areas and a maze-like structure to promote exploration and backtracking by rewarding the player with permanent upgrades, whether they be ammunition or health expansions or new weapons and abilities that allow Samus to move forward and explore the deepest regions of the planet to surprising discoveries. Zero Mission does all this, but makes it better. Similar, but different, and overall, an all-new experience with a lot added and more depth to the gameplay. The atmospheric music keeps you on your toes at all times, keeping myself on edge at all times due to literally everything here trying to kill you. I want to thank the drunken poet himself, Dempsey, for making some awesome remixes of some of the classic Metroid themes that you may have heard throughout this video. Go and subscribe to him, his channel link is in the description. The Metroid series is a video game series I really wish I got into as a kid, so I could be excited for them the way I was excited for new Mario and Zelda games as they came out. It has the best aspects of both Mario and Zelda, making a fun platforming exploratory adventure with Western elements and most notably the sci-fi horror elements of the first Alien film. The first game in both forms are phenomenal and have inspired so many games in this genre, annoyingly to me known as Metroidvania. I think the genre should have just been called Metroid Adventure, because I don't think Castlevania earned that right, even though I believe Symphony of the Night is a phenomenal game, but it came out years after the fact. And Simon's Quest, well, let's say that game leaves much to be desired, in my opinion. I know Dempsey will profoundly disagree on that take, but hey, we like what we like, even though it's not good. I highly recommend this first game in both forms and the series in general because of all that I have mentioned above, and also because we get the best female video game protagonist of all time in my book. So let's continue to play as Samus Aran and continue to explore and blast some space pirates. Will the last Metroid be in captivity? Will the galaxy ever be at peace? Until the next mission, stay nerdporial everybody, and the galaxy may one day find peace. Thanks for watching my Metroid retrospective. I am sorry this one took longer to release than anything before due to, life. I've done other retrospectives from other Nintendo franchises, so check those out at your leisure, and if you haven't, hit the subscribe, like, and bell for notifications, and if you really enjoy this content, you can click the join button to become a member of the Nerdporial Continuum. Once again, thanks everybody for watching this, and here's a quick peek at my next video game retrospective. Were you ever a 9-year-old and saw that a new Mario game was coming out and got excited for it during the Super Nintendo era? Did you realize as a dumb kid that you were duped into buying an educational game? Did my dumb ass learn something from Mario being missing? Has Mario ever learned about history from using Bowser's time machine? And even more importantly, has Mario ever taught me how to type? All this and more on the next video game retrospective, Super Mario, an educational series retrospective. Keep those brains learning as Mario traverses Bowser's castle while teaching useful information to yours truly. Has Luigi ever visited the Golden Gate Bridge or Mount Fuji? Find out next time.